We got some half-price crack ties, some miles and miles of carpet tiles, TVs, deep freeze and David Bowie LPs, pool games, gold chains, what's names and header push, and Trevor Francis tracksuits from a mush in Shepherd's Bush. Push, 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 push.
So, for millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people, they found themselves engaged in a game of survival, a deadly game of survival. But some people were able to feast through the famine. Party members, basically. Anyone even remotely high up in the party. I think I said earlier there were 3 or 4 million odd members of the party. I think actually that's more like in the mid-50s or pre-58. By sort of 61, I think there's more like 17 million members of the party. Even though they'd purged it loads of times, there was just massive increase of numbers of membership because you get perks, you get food. Okay. You go to a party meeting, the more important it is, the more this happened. You go there and everything's laid on. Everything, like free buffets. You get put up in hotels where you just get free stuff. So it's sort of a no-brainer. If you don't care, it's sort of a no-brainer. You join the party and you just run one step up on loads of people. So there was like for example, there was a registration system that split peasants or rural country folk from city dwellers. They're usually called city dwellers. I think that's the translation. And there was really like a wall put up between them, not a physical wall. Although there were actual physicals, like a cordon sanitaire between the big cities and rural areas. But at least in the minds of the party, in the bureaucracy, there was a real them and us between. Well, there's a real them and us between the party and everyone else, but among everyone else between peasants and city dwellers.
Totally fits with communism. Communism is such an urban thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's such an urban way of seeing things, and it's all about like the action is in the cities, and obviously, as like Marx expected, that most of mankind would become much or most of mankind would become proletarianized before they were ready for revolution. And proletarian meant the workers of the cities, right? The industrial workers. And they generally have contempt for the peasantry, and they think of the peasantry as intrinsically reactionary, isn't they? And they think of the countryside as a reactionary place, as a place of the past, and a place that has to be corralled and beaten.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly. In this case, yeah. In the reality of Maoist China, yeah, that is what happened, yeah.
And they are right. In order to have communism, you do have to destroy rural life in loads of ways, right?
But in Mao's sort of heavily, almost like a caste system put in place, even sort of your state rations of cigarettes entirely depended on what sort of group you were in. You know, this level of party membership meant you got 3 packs of half-decent cigarettes, and like 2 ranks above that you got 5 packs of the best cigarettes, etc., etc.
Probably really crap cigarettes.
Probably.
Or maybe bought from abroad.
Well, yeah, if you're high up in the party, you probably get foreign good ones, American ones.
You said they like 555s, didn't you?
Or Mao, personally, always liked 555s. But then he changed to Panda, which is a Chinese brand. But, yeah, on that subject, Frank Dakota writes, quote, "At the apex of the party stood the leadership, who had special residences ensconced behind high walls, security guards around the clock, and chauffeured cars. Special shops with scarce goods at discounted prices were reserved for them and their families. Dedicated farms produced high-quality vegetables, meat, chicken and eggs, which were analysed for freshness and tested for poison before being sampled by tasters. Only then was food served to the leaders in the capital and the provinces. Above them was Mao, living in opulence near the Forbidden City where emperors had once dwelled, his bedroom the size of a ballroom. Sumptuous villas staffed with chefs and attendants all year round were at his beck and call in every province or major city. At the bottom of the scale were the millions locked away in labour camps located in the harshest parts of the countryside, from the bitterly cold plains of Manchuria to the arid deserts of Gansu. They were made to break stones, dig for coal, carry bricks, or plough the desert for years on end without any recourse to the law." End quote. Frank Dakota's book's good. It is good. It is quite harrowing though. It's just like almost an endless stream of like hypocrisy and misery. So yeah, it's not a barrel of laughs, but his research is beyond reproach. Thorough isn't the word, so he knows what he's talking about. That's why I'm quoting so heavily from him.
It would be interesting to see him in debate or whatever or a written exchange with, like, the world's top Mao apologist. There must be a few. There must be some. Right?
I wonder what that would be like. I wonder if it would just be like some throwback guy just like shouting a slogan or something. I don't know how you can really defend Mao, really, if you really knew about it all, or about Maoism, or the reality of the Maoist era. I don't know how you could do it. You'd have to be a complete ideologue to the point where it's just obvious that you're mental. Sorry, go on. What was you going to say?
No, even then you'd have to be evasive. I wonder what, there must be some official Communist Party history of that period now. And they must just talk about it in terms that avoids talking about it.
Yeah. I think they talk a load about natural disasters.
They built a big gold statue of Mao a couple of years ago.
Uh-huh. I saw a documentary just a couple of years ago where some British or Western journalist was interviewing someone about Mao in front of a big Mao statue somewhere, and just everyday people just started crowding around and berating them for daring to question the chairman's greatness.
The great helmsman.
Yeah. He really did a number on a lot of people's heads, shall we say. People stole from the canteens, obviously, but nobody really saved in this period. It was pointless. There was no incentive to save. Any property, let alone money, was going to be taken from you. So, yeah, when the rumours came that they were going to do full urban communes, which they didn't actually ever do, because the Great Leap Forward was such a catastrophe. There were rumours that they were going to do, full-blown urban communes, and people went a bit crazy. A lot of people went a bit nuts at that. If they had any sort of reserve of food or anything like that, they just ate it.
Was the armed forces, frequently used against the people in this time?
No, not really. Because you had the militias. It was all about the militias, which are separate to the PLA, the People's Liberation Army. The army, you made sure Mao and the party made sure they were well fed. They were one of the top groups that, it pretty much went like the party, or the leadership of the party, the rest of the party, the army, urban dwellers, and then country folk. And then sort of the old or infirmed or imprisoned. Yeah, you get almost nothing. But no, it's all they had to call in the army a few times. Like in the Cultural Revolution, they needed the PLA to actually put down the Red Guard in the end. And they do use the army once or twice, I think, to stamp out some truly insane carders who had turned their little area into an actual hell. But mainly not, no.
So there wasn't big rebellions to put down?
Not big ones, no. There were a few. I'll talk about that in a minute.
Okay.
So for normal people, it came down to a question of being able to do a little bit of wheeling and dealing, shall we say, some nefarious things in order to stay alive. It kind of came down to that. Frank Dicotta says, quote, "Whatever their position in the social hierarchy, virtually everybody from top to bottom subverted the system of distribution, covertly giving full scope to the very profit motive that the party tried to eliminate. As famine developed, the survival of an ordinary person came increasingly to depend on the ability to lie, charm, hide, steal, cheat, pilfer, forage, smuggle, slack, trick, manipulate, or otherwise outwit the state." End quote.
It's just a war of the state against the population.
It became that, yeah, basically, yeah. He talks all about how there's a sort of a nation of gatekeepers, that petty power corrupted petty people. Anyone from like a train conductor could just jam up anyone else's day pretty badly by being like a stickler for rules. Anyone could denounce anyone else. Yeah, they were just sort of arbitrary and capricious or even tyrannical carders who, yeah, just gave license to just petty bullshit, or really violent, murderous petty bullshit.
And all over the country, there's probably like really cross-cutting lines of authority as well. Like,
yeah. Well, it's described like you've got to have connections. It all came down to connections. Once the sort of state had destroyed itself essentially in many ways, or the economy certainly had, you had to rely really heavily on just your connections, your personal sort of network of people you knew. You know, via means of gifts and bribes and barter and favours. You just sort of got by that way. Everyone tried to sort of help each other out where possible, quite a lot. Like people you knew, you know, like your cousin 2 villages over is actually starving to death and you happen to have a tiny bit of surplus food, you would probably try and help him out. Or if you'd got a job in a city and you might be able to help your cousin out who's still in the rural areas and you're sort of trying to legally smuggle him in, that sort of thing, you know. Yeah, a planned economy sort of spawns small networks, small capitalist style networks. Well, certainly a parallel economy grew up, an entire black market for everything, absolutely everything. At one point later in the 60s, they had a party investigation. I think it was in Beijing, but I can't remember. And they just said, oh yeah, you can get everything you want on the black market. So, yeah, the planned economy didn't work.
What, and the party began to acknowledge it openly?
No. That was a secret internal report, that.
Oh, right.
Well, loads of what we now know or think of as the truth from that period are the released party documents. So the vast majority of party documents from the Great Leap Forward period are locked away and are probably going to remain that way for the foreseeable future. But there's loads as well that aren't. There's like some provincial capitals that in the 2000s allowed historians to go in and look at their archives. And that's what's happened. So we don't have like the minutes of meetings with like Mao and Zhou Enlai or anything, but we do have things like that for people a couple of rungs lower. So we do know a lot.
Right.
And we do know in really quite good detail now. But it would be a million times better if the Chinese authorities let us see everything. But that's, you know.
And those records probably still do exist.
I think so. I believe so. I mean, they're talked of as though they are, but they might not be. I don't know. I don't know.
It's such a shame that the communists are still in charge.
Yeah.
I mean,
although they're not Maoists, are they? Really? Even though they might pretend to be nominally, but
there was never a collapse of the regime.
No.
So they can still cover up everything they want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Still manipulate the past to control the present.
Mostly. Not entirely. I mean, we're still talking about it. But a lot of people just try to cut the state out of their dealings. Just have a barter economy. Goods are the currency.
Better than nothing.
A lot better than nothing, yeah. There was just huge embezzlement on every level you can imagine, of course. There was endless borrowing from state-run banks, which is a pretty silly thing. Doesn't really make any sense to me. I'm talking on sort of the commune level or sort of the local authority level, huge borrowing. Normal people, or certainly a rural peasant, would never be allowed, wouldn't even probably know you could borrow from such a thing, but which was never paid back, or mostly never paid back. And then there was just plain stealing from anyone and anything by most people endemically. Yeah, there's a huge black market in labour. There were like shadow factories that the state didn't necessarily know or would turn a blind eye to sometimes in some cases.
Because they were delivering.
Yeah. There was a massive movement of people, like I mentioned, from rural areas, if they could, towards cities. And people sometimes in urban areas anyway would try to, if they could anyway, try to hoard the state coupons or goods. But wouldn't ever really bother try to hoard money. Not the yuan, anyway. There's no point. On sort of a local, or even higher than local, administrative level, they would gamble. They would gamble with the sort of state, the handout that the state had given you. They would gamble with it out of desperation because it wasn't enough. Like carders would just bet to try and survive, and of course it wouldn't. Yeah, try and get some more.
When you say about coupons,
yeah,
I always think of communism as a system where you queue up to get a coupon to queue up to fail to get something else.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so these coupons were really, really easy to forge as well. They were printed on crappy paper. And the idea was that they were sort of localised and changed sort of maybe every month. So you sort of had to use them when you got them was the idea. But that never really worked. And they were just massive forgeries. And I did hear one story. I think it was in the suburbs of Beijing in like 1960 or something, when you would basically queue up to get a coupon, to get in a queue for a coupon that got you a number that got you into a queue for some food, but it was all gone almost straight away. So
you wait, and then the longest queue that doesn't move, and then it does move, and you get to the front, and they've run out.
Well, they said whenever you saw a queue, a bit like I've heard the same story from the Great Depression in America, actually. If you see a queue, you just join it, because it's a queue for something. But of course, in a barter economy, the sort of the more sort of brutal reality of that is that everything is for sale. You know, the clothes off your back, literally, your blood, sex, of course, your children, as I've mentioned. Apparently, apparently it is a thing that's happened in China since time immemorial, that in times of extreme, unbelievable hardship and poverty, you give your children away, you sell your children. That wasn't unique to the Great Leap Forward, but it happened loads during the Great Leap Forward.
You said that Mao had given some of his kids away, or one kid away, during the Long March.
Yeah, that's true.
Because it couldn't be taken away.
I think most children that were born, the handful of children that were actually born on the Long March were given away. I mean, they were literally on the run, so they were being hunted.
I wonder if people sold babies to eat as well.
Well, so they could eat. Yeah. Well, I mean, I've read loads of stories where a guy, like off the top of my head, the first one that springs to mind was a guy, he had 6 kids, and he sold a 10-year-old son one time for like 15 yuan and some rice cakes. And then a few months later, he sold his 10-month-old baby for even less, like 5 yuan and a pound of rice or something. Because, of course, not only do you get the tiny amount, like the 15 yuan or whatever it is, but you also have one less mouth that you've got to then feed. So, yes, the reality of that is harrowing. I can't really imagine it, really.
It's a whole society just going wrong.
Yeah, plunged into a type of hell. Yeah. Yeah, so in order to survive, quite often, it came down to having to be a little bit sly. Rapacious carders, as the years went on, just really tried to take everything. Certainly I'm talking about in rural areas. They really stamped out all private property, really. But the people weren't entirely passive victims. There's a range of things that they did, mostly revolving around sort of apathy and loafing. Just shirking and slacking, and you'd put your own sentries out, often kids, and if there was any group of party members coming along or carders, you'd pretend to be working, and then after they left, you'd just down your tools and just sit down all day. Apparently loads of that was going on. There just simply weren't enough carders and party members and militia members to enforce it all on everyone all the time, depending on where you were.
You especially don't want to be working really hard if you're starving as well, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, there's loads of accounts of people just passing out in the fields or by furnaces because they're too weak, or it's too hot in the blazing sun, or by the furnaces, or it's too cold in the winters up north. But workers became masters of time theft, basically. And theft itself was endemic, particularly among transport workers on trains and boats and things. There were many hands out trying to steal things at every juncture, you know. When you're starving, morality sort of goes out the window, and most people just steal what they can. I mean, why wouldn't you? I suppose I would.
Yeah, it's perfectly understandable.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that thing of what they call eating green, meaning taking corn or grain straight from the field and just eating it, just sort of rolling it in your hand until it's sort of edible, just about, and just eating it.
It makes sense if they're doing that thing of dumping loads of seed on one patch.
Yeah, well, apparently it worked better in the north where you were actually hidden among sort of corn or wheat fields, whereas in rice paddies, more in the south, it was not as much. But whole fields in the north apparently were eaten as though locusts had gone through. And of course, the penalty for that was a thorough beating, maybe a beating to death, but it happened really badly in sort of 1960, 61, when the famine, arguably at its height. So Frank Ducotta says that maybe only half of all sort of the state food that was meant to reach people ever did. He writes, quote, "It was pilfered from the granaries, taken during transportation, pocketed by accountants, confiscated by carders, and finally filched by cooks before a bowl of rice was ever served in a canteen. When local carders colluded with the farmers, powerful forms of collective theft, subterfuge, and deception could emerge." End quote. So a lot of carders would, or the nicer ones, of which there doesn't seem to be all that many, would have two sets of books, the real ones and the ones they sent up to the party. And some of those real ones survive. So we can sort of compare them and see how sort of a dual reality sort of grew up. There's obviously tons of false reporting and creative accounting. Like some of a very small number of these carders would do it to sort of try and save lives, but most wouldn't. Most were looking out for their career, looking to reach a target. It doesn't really matter how many people might die. And when food runs out, people often turn on each other. Social cohesion can be wrecked in a desperate fight for survival. I mean, it usually is. Community bonds were broken in the countryside, and the family unit becomes an arena for strife, like jealousy and conflict. Like even within your own family unit could be seething with resentment over that one bowl of rice. Horrible, terrible, sort of nightmarish scenarios played out hundreds of millions of times over. And famine's like basically a zero-sum game as well, isn't it? I mean, yeah. If there's a finite amount of food, that's a zero-sum game.
You'll kill people who you know. Yeah.
Ducotta says, quote, "Throughout the countryside, radical collectivisation created conditions of extreme shortage in which one person's survival depended upon another person's starvation. In the end, through a combination of destructive policies initiated from above and covert forms of self-help pursued from below, the country imploded. But while self-defence and self-destruction in the famished countryside were often hard to disentangle, it was the weak, vulnerable and poor who suffered the most." End quote. So just as in war or any sort of time of just extremes, the weakest get picked off first.
All in pursuit of social justice, of course.
Yeah, to eradicate any rightist conservatism. They say quite a lot. That was like the enemy. But people did try to... the recourses that you had were very limited. They say that in that 1958 Lushan conference, the truth had died, and that nobody mentioned the famine in the leadership around Mao. It was just a taboo. You just didn't do it. It was like the kiss of death for your career. Or maybe an actual kiss of death. I mean, many carders ended up, got like beaten to death or put in re-education camps and stuff.
For trying to report the truth.
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah.
In a just society, you can't have the truth. The rightist conservative truth.
No, and just as, sort of North Korea tries to hide or go to great lengths to sort of hide the embarrassing things, so a lot of carders did, if they knew, a big party delegation was coming down from Beijing, they would just get all the most worst obvious famine victims and push them up into the hills for a few days until that inspection party had passed and that sort of thing. And, of course, the whole time Mao and the sort of Chinese Foreign Office, so to speak, put out that everything's going great to the rest of the world. And some people even bought it. Francois Mitterrand buys it. He says that, Mao is a great man and his vision is good and all that sort of thing.
Who was Mitterrand at the time? Just a minister or?
Yeah, something like that, yeah. There was a guy, John Temple, who was a Tory MP. He went over there in 1960 at the height of it. And the line attributed to him is "Communism works," mainly because he was only shown good things. Simple as that.
And took that at face value.
Yeah. Just
perhaps was paid to say these things.
I don't know.
Or just a moron.
A useful idiot. Yeah, I don't know. But he was duped. But, you know, the truth will out, and lots of other people were less gullible. People that, like, had families in Vietnam and Burma or Hong Kong or something, knew what was actually going on, actually had sort of a line to the unfiltered truth, and of course that filtered out, and, you know, not immediately, but by 1960, 1961, 1962, the world knew that there'd been some sort of terrible goings on in China. But only if you were, like, sort of switched on, you know, it wasn't splashed all over CBS or BBC in 1961 or anything. But
I suppose some people will judge that on balance, Mao did more good than harm.